Welcome to Custom Drupal Data Migration, a Georgia GovHub story. I'm April Sides. I'm a senior developer at Lullabot, and the Georgia.gov migration project was my first project at Lullabot and my first migration, so I'm really excited to share some of the things we did. I'm also the lead organizer of Drupal Camp Asheville, which is July 10th through 12th this year. We're currently accepting trainings and session submissions on our website, and I have stickers, not that sticker, but cooler stickers, I don't know, and some Lullabot stickers, and I hope you join us this summer. So at Lullabot, we provide strategy, design, and Drupal development for large-scale publishers, and if you're interested in working with us, let's chat. So I want to start off by introducing the Lullabot migration team for this project. Me, of course. Karen Stevenson is our Chief Technology Officer. She was very instrumental in providing a lot of guidance and direction because she had a lot of migration experience. Marcus Cano is a senior developer, and he did all the file migrations and really kept our code clean and organized. Darren Peterson is our senior technical project manager. He was our fearless leader, and he kept us moving forward. And James Sansbury, who is now the Tugboat Technical Account Executive, was responsible for our DevOps magic and that made our work possible. I also want to give a shout out to the Digital Services Georgia team. They're definitely one of my favorite clients. So what we're going to cover is the discovery and planning process, some strategies and workflow, and some magical nerdery. So discovery and planning. When you're doing a migration, you think about the source and a destination. You're going to move content from a source to a destination, which in this case was Drupal 8. For this project, the Drupal 7 site, or Drupal 7 multisite, was the source. And they had about 85 plus websites. Each had their own database, which kind of made it easier in that sense. They were hosted on Acquia. They had 27 content types, 15 of which we did an automated migration. 14 taxonomy vocabularies, 9 of which we migrated. And they had the architecture of paragraphs, field collections, and entity embeds. The destination site was Drupal 8 multisite, and we migrated them in groups of about 6 at a time. It is also hosted on Acquia. We had a completely different architecture on the Drupal 8 site, so we had 20 content types, and we populated 14 of those with data from the Drupal 7 site. We had 17 taxonomy vocabularies, 10 of which we populated. And we had an architecture using something we called micro content types, which were nodes, but you couldn't view them as a standalone node, and they could be embedded and referenced in fields. So I want to preface this with the use of multi-site, the number of sites, and the new architecture of Drupal 8 are really the things that made this a custom migration and a more complex migration. So it may not be this, it probably is not going to be this complex for your site. So kicking off the discovery process, Karen Stevenson had a script that would query the Drupal 7 database for all the filled instances, the entities that they were attached to, the bundles, and all this information. And we converted it to a Google Sheet. And this was very useful in identifying our source fields as we were sort of planning out the migration. At the same time, we had this document, which was provided by our content strategy team, that told us about the content model for Drupal 8. So basically, all the content types and media types were built in the Drupal 8 site manually, and this sort of told us where the data needed to go for those content types as we're doing the field mapping, so the destination. So after those two were created, I created this document to kind of manage our process and get a high-level status of what fields had migrated for what content types, what the source and the destination fields were, just so we could have a high-level view of what our status was in completing the migration. Since this project, I'm on a different project now, and we've actually iterated on this a little bit. I combined Karen's script that has all the field instances and added in some details about the mapping. So we can focus on the field level mapping and not so much the content type. Instead of having to put line breaks in my cells, it was a lot easier to filter this and to see the status. And I used conditional formatting to highlight new rows, like this is a new field, or some of these things weren't migrating, and it was easy to kind of see a high-level view of that. And I was able to fill this out with our assumptions during discovery and hand it off to a developer, and he just has been doing the migrations without needing to ask a lot of questions. We've also shared this document with the client so that they can make sure our assumptions were correct from the discovery process. So the document's a lot longer than the other one because it's got a lot of duplication on the left. But in Google Sheets, you can use filter views. So you can create a filter view for each of your content types. And then if you're focused on the migration of event, you're only going to see those fields. So I've actually created a migration planner project on Drupal.org. It doesn't have code yet. I have the code, hoping to upload it very soon. But it's a Drupal 8 module that has a drush command that can run this once you've connected your Drupal 7 database to your Drupal 8 site. It can run the queries and generate an Excel file that you can import into Google Sheets, and then I'm going to have a Google Sheet document available that you can copy the conditional formatting if you want to use that. So stay tuned for that. Another tool that we developed for discovery is something we called Squealer. It's a Drupal 8 module with a drush 9 command, and it runs in the Drupal 8 site, connects to the Drupal 7 database based on the configuration in settings.php. So there were a number of scans that this command would run on the Drupal 7 database. We were kind of looking for issues that could either be fixed before migration or to just be aware of things we needed to process on its way to Drupal 8. So it just gave us a good overview. And the list grew as we had other questions throughout the development process. We wanted to know, paragraphs. We wanted to know if anybody had overridden meta tags and things like that. And we actually were generating this report because there's 85 sites, right? So each site's going to have its own values for this report, and we were able to generate that, share it with the client. The client, if they decided, I really don't want this content to migrate, they could go in and delete it before we do the migration. So it was very much a part of our migration workflow. So you could run the drush command, your site alias, and squeal, and it generates an Excel file in your site's files directory with a date, because you could run it multiple times if changes had happened. And it looks a bit like this. The report, so each of these tabs was a scan. So if there were results for one of these scans, looking for iframes or tables and things like that, then there would be a tab. If there weren't any results, the tab didn't exist. And the goal was to trace any of the issues back to the node. So we have a URL that they could click to and go to the node level and investigate the issue that we found. So I've also created a project on Drupal.org for this. I'm still working on generalizing the code so it will work for more websites. So keep an eye on that if you're interested. So strategies and workflows. There were things that we did not migrate and things that we did migrate. So we did not migrate the structural elements of the Drupal 7 site. So we didn't migrate content types and field definitions. We made those from scratch in Drupal 8. We didn't migrate the actual vocabularies. And we didn't migrate the paragraphs and field collection bundles. We didn't migrate views or web form submissions. The things that we did migrate were the data elements, so select nodes and field data, select taxonomy terms, menus, web forms, and files. So these are the migration-related modules that we used. We used the core migrate and migrate Drupal modules, as well as a lot of contrib tools that are really useful and helpful. I also included migrate source UI, even though it wasn't used in the automated migration that we did. The client wanted a way to import CSV files. If they didn't have the data in Drupal 7, they could import it from a CSV file, while we're doing the migration or even later after the automated migration had happened. So that was really useful. And then our custom modules, when you're doing a migration, you have sort of a migrate module. So our main one was GA migrate. We had another one called GA migrate site, which I'll talk about later, that we use for site-specific overrides. And then we had one that was kind of tied to the migrate UI source that provided the migrations for importing the CSV files. Our development tools, for this project we used Lando for our local development environment. Our QA environment was tugboat.qa. Our DevOps magic was CircleCI, and we used key.io to manage Docker containers and things like that so that they could be shared with Tugboat. These Docker containers contain the files and the databases from the Drupal 7 site. So there was definitely a lot of magic that I don't understand, but James Stansberry did a really great job giving us a great foundation. So Tugboat is a Lullabot product. This was my first time using Tugboat, and it's amazing how much time it saves. You can submit a pull request, and it will build a version of the site as if you had merged it so that you can test whether the code works or not, or to even show it to a client for review. So we use it in our migration process as well, giving the client access to review what's been happening. It was very much a part of our workflow. So as far as our development workflow, we decided to focus on basic fields, and then for each of the content types, and then sort of move on to more complex fields. This allowed us to show the client that the content exists, even if it's not all of the content for a particular content type. So for instance, we would do, if we're migrating blog posts, we would have an initial ticket and PR that would just have basic fields like title and just things that we didn't have to do a lot of transformations with. And then we can merge that as a simple PR that's very reviewable, and then iterate later and fill in the gaps. So that was we were able to keep our PR small and reviewable, and these are sort of the things we broke down: basic fields, rich fields, the files and images, handling paragraphs and field collections, and some WYSIWYG field cleanup. So our migration development strategy was that we created and edited the migration configuration in the config sync directory. So we didn't have them in the GA migrate module and have to manage that importing and all that. We preserved our node IDs for content that was going to be a standalone node. We migrated unpublished content because we may have menu links or other content referencing that content, and then they can make decisions about whether things need to be deleted or fixed in Drupal 8. We prioritize the ability to roll back and re-import content. We're working on 6 sites at a time. It's good to be able to put the content in. If something was wrong, we fix the migration logic. We can roll it back in. And that means that we didn't use things like process plugins like Entity Generate, which generates nodes during the migration process, but you can't roll them back. So we were very thoughtful on that. We used the GA migrate site module for site-specific overrides. And we also had a custom logging solution that would allow us to log if something was skipped or if there was an exception, just to allow us to understand what happened throughout the process. We're doing 6 sites at a time. There's a lot of stuff going on. Our solution order was that we wanted to look at solving problems with configuration, core, and contrib first. If we couldn't solve the problem using that as a resource, we would create a custom source or process plugins or services in the GA migrate module. And if we couldn't solve it that way, then we would resort to using hooks within the .module file. So the custom logging tool was developed by Marcos. It was a great way to like I said, track exceptions and things along the way. He just created a function that we can use anywhere in our code. And of course my dad's calling me while I'm giving this presentation. Isn't that awesome? So it just tracked everything in a table. We could provide a detailed message about what was going on, the current migration ID that's running, the audience. So is it something that a developer needs to look at or something the client needs to look at? Does it need to be fixed, or do we just want to make sure that whatever we expected to happen, it happened, or that sort of thing? We had some severity, strings we could use, a short descriptor, and the current actual row that is being migrated. And so he had a drush command that would create a TSV file that we could import into Google Sheets, and we could share with the client. It was great for tracking down problems, mostly for finding edge cases. So you do the migration once, and it works for the first group of 6. When you go to the next phase, there might be some variances that you have to take care of. So it's got all the different columns. And then you can filter them. So like if you're looking, or something happened on a particular node, you could search for that node ID and be able to go from there. So how do we migrate 85 plus sites? The answer is in phases. So we migrated the migration phases were staggered in groups of about 6 sites over 2-week periods. Each phase looks something like this. We would add the new group of sites to Tugboat and remove the old sites, the previously migrated ones from Tugboat. That's to save on resources. You've got all those files and databases, so we had to do that as a process. We would run the migrations on a Tugboat and let the client do QA on it. They would come back and let us know if we needed to fix anything, and the development team would fix the issues. And then we would run the migration on production. The client would prepare the site for launch. They may have some manual things that they were migrating or that sort of thing, and then the sites would be launched. So, magical nerdery time. Everybody put their technical hat on, because we're getting a little bit technical here. So Karen told me this was the most complex migration she'd ever done. Most migrations are not this complex, so I don't want to scare anybody away from migrating to Drupal 8 for sure. But I picked out some of our more complex problems and wanted to show you a little bit of how we solved them and just sort of the power of the migration system itself in Drupal. So we'll start with an easy one, hopefully. I'm going to give credit to Karen for this solution. When you're migrating 85 plus sites, you're going to have some variances in how people, how the owners of those sites want the content to migrate. So we needed a way to have site-specific overrides. And our solution was that we have a pretty empty basic module in the top-level module directory. And if a site needed to override something, we would copy that module into the site-specific module directory, and then we can make tweaks from there. So if a site doesn't have the site-specific one, it's going to default to the main one. If it has one, that's the one that Drupal is going to recognize and use. And we also have the GA migrate site module below GA migrate in the order of modules when they run, so that any overrides happen after the GA migrate code has run. So really the only code that was in there was an interface that had some constants. So we have a few constants here regarding how we were handling some press releases. I think the default was that press releases would be unpublished after they migrated. They would be unpublished if they were 3 years old. And some sites didn't want to do that. Some sites wanted all of them. And we also had a migration site skip list array where you could register a node that you didn't want to migrate, like a specific node. And that was mostly used if a node was going to be replaced by a view in Drupal 8. And then within the .module file, you could implement the hooks and hook into the process and make any specific changes that you might need to make. Hey, how are we doing? Is that an easy one? Ah, awesome. All right, that's the paragraphs. So their Drupal 7 site had what I call container paragraphs and content paragraphs. So they had like 1 column, 2 column, 3 column container paragraphs that would then hold the content paragraphs that were like images, infographics, related links, and stuff. So we look at an example. We've got our node at the high level. Our node has a field called field content. And that field references the container paragraphs, 2 column and 1 column. But the content is actually inside those paragraphs in the related links, the image, and the text area content paragraphs. So our paragraph strategy was that we wanted to convert the paragraphs into Drupal 8 markup. And that would include, if it needed to be, an entity embed in Drupal 8, we could do that. We could generate the new entity embed code, and we wanted to stack that new content in the body field. So we use something called a pseudo field in migrations. It's kind of a temporary field. It kind of feels like a variable in a way within the migration. So we would kind of pre-process the filled content and figure out what each of those paragraph items needed to look like in Drupal 8, how they should be rendered, and then we could use that pseudo field later. So when I say rendered, I mean, what does the Drupal 7 content type, or Drupal 7 content need to look like in Drupal 8? Not what it looked like in Drupal 7, but what it needs to transform to. So if you found a paragraph that was like that text paragraph, maybe it needs to be text markup. Maybe an image is an entity embed of a new media item. File download links, and within the container paragraphs, maybe there needs to be an adjustment. Maybe something needs to have like a left or a right attribute added. All right, so using a recursive function, meaning a function that can call itself, the process plugin iterates deep until it hits a content paragraph, renders at that level, and then renders its way back out until it reaches the filled level. So in this case, the GTA paragraphs related links field, or paragraph, would be rendered first. Then it would go to the paragraph image, and it would come back out to 2 columns and determine if it needed to add like a left align, right align, that sort of thing. It would go to the next paragraph, into it to find the content, render that, back out to 1 column, and then concatenate all that markup into a string for field content. This is what our pseudo field would hold. So once we had that, our prepared field content pseudo field, we can concatenate it to the top of the body field using the concat process plugin, I believe core or contrib. How is that? Yeah, that's some nerdery right there. All right, circular dependencies. This was an interesting thing. So we had site pages in Drupal 7 that were being migrated to topic pages, and these site pages had a field-related links field. But in Drupal 8, we didn't want to have a field-related links field. We wanted to create a new node called a link collection, and then we wanted to embed that in the WYSIWYG field, in the body field. So the site page, or this field, linked to external links, internal links, node references, that sort of thing. So what we did is we did a migration. This one was a field-related links migration that only migrated the content from that field into the link collections. And it used the site page node ID as a reference, so we could find it later. So we've migrated our field-related links into a link collection. When we start doing the site page migration, we have the node ID. We're going to look and find the link collection node and insert the entity embed code into the body field. Then migrate it to a topic page. So we had another pseudo field. Let's see. Yep. Yeah, this is a pseudo field. This is in the site page migration. We're doing a migration lookup within that field-related links migration that runs previously, with the node ID being sent. And then we had another custom plugin that just basically says, okay, I have the node. What does this entity embed code need to look like? And then you can add that string to the body field. Like this. So we've got the pseudo field. We now have that entity embed string. We concatenate it to the bottom of the field in this case. So in this situation, our dependencies are the site page migration is dependent on the field-related links migration happening first, so that that link collection exists, and we can go find it and add it to the body field. But what we found in QA was that the site page migration has not run when the field-related links are being migrated. So if there was a site page reference in that field, it would be null here. We would lose that link. So what we did, we added this to the field-related links migration. And the sole purpose of it was to generate stubbed site page, or in this case, the site page node in Drupal 8, so that we just had that reference. So within migrations, you have the ability to create stubbed content that's just like a container. It doesn't really have any of your content, but it exists. And then when the site page migration runs next, it will fill in all that content and everything will be happy, right? So in this case, we have our topic page reference. Even though it hasn't migrated yet, it's still going to link to the content when all the migration is completed. But this introduces a new dependency. So the field-related links dependency, or the field-related links migration, is now going to be dependent on the site page migration, because we've invoked that migration, migration lookup. It just inherits this dependency. So we've got a chicken and egg situation here. So we figured out it works if the non-specified dependency that was added to filter links when we're doing the stubbing process, if the ID of that migration is alphabetically before the one you're running it in, it works. How we discovered it is we were doing it with a different content type, and the alphabetical order was different. So with index list, the full migration was alphabetically lower than, or came after the field-related links one. So the fix or hack is that we added a 1 in there to make it alphabetically better. I did create an issue on Drupal.org. It's a very edge case scenario here, but it was kind of a weird thing to discover and sort out. All right, I think this is our last one. Everybody still, we still here? Oh, awesome.
So can I ask a question about, you go back one slide? So you were running the migration as a group?
Yes.
Right? Mm-hmm. If you ran them independently in the right order, it worked. So it wasn't so much a migration problem, it was just a migration dependency.
Within the group.
Right, so as you ran the group, it was how Drupal core was ordering the dependencies.
Yeah, there's got to be something, and he was saying that, Mike was saying that if we ran the migrations independently, it would have been fine. It was because we're running it in a group, and it was based on the order in which the migration group process recognized those migrations. Yeah, so I was trying to figure out if there was a way, at what point does the migration know that these exist? Because it would say it didn't exist. That was the issue. So there's got to be a way to fix that, but I haven't had the resources to work on that.
Does the issue suggest a solution of adding a weight to dependent migrations or something like that, or?
What I put in there was this kind of solution, basically just saying, hey, this is an issue, but it is an edge case, so it's probably not going to be picked up really quickly, but it is an interesting case. I couldn't, just looking quickly to see how I could figure out how to fix it. It got into the weeds. So we went with the solution and documented it so other people could know it exists and go on from there. All right, so WYSIWYG DOM processing. So in the Migrate Plus module, there is a process plugin called DOM, Document Object Model. Let me start over. This is the process plugin, the DOM plugin, that's converting HTML to a document object model object. And we implemented this solution later in our process. We were originally using regular expressions. And so for a more robust replacement situation, we just put our work, we refactored our work and just sandwiched it between the conversion of the markup to the document object and then exported it back to a string value. And we stack them. When you do it in an array, you can stack it and it runs that way. So if you've never used the DOM object in PHP, it's a bit of a black box. Xdebug doesn't really show you anything. So this is the process that I found most helpful to get the elements from the document object, loop through and collect the items that you want to alter, replace, or remove in an array, and then loop through the collection array and do the altering, replacing, and removing of the elements. Because if you try to remove content when you're going through it, if you're, instead of collecting it, you're trying to run those actions there, things get messy and misplaced and it doesn't work properly. So this is a basic example in code format. You have an elements variable where you're using the getElementsByTagName off of the document object model. And in this case, we're getting all elements because it's an asterisk. But you can do divs, you can get all the divs, all the p tags, whatever. And then I initialized a remove elements array, because in this case I'm talking about removing elements. And if elements were found, meaning the length is greater than 0, loop through each element, and I have a comment here. You would have a condition, like if you wanted to remove all of the paragraphs of a certain class or something like that. Whatever your condition is, add that element to your remove elements array, and then loop through the remove elements array. And in this case, this remove element and content was a custom method that I had, so I put all of my logic for doing that in one method so I could tweak it from there. But you can do your removal process in a second loop. So some of the alterations that we handled in this plugin, we converted Drupal 7 entity embeds to Drupal 8 embed syntax. We converted image tags to media entity embeds. We changed links that were to files. We changed them to a download link so that when you click it, it downloads it immediately. We looked at iframes. In that case, iframes were used as both sort of a code block situation, or it could be a video. So we would use a media entity if it was a video URL, and the code block if it wasn't. And then just basic text filtering based on the Drupal 8 text format. You know, if the Drupal 8 field doesn't accept tables, we needed to strip that code out. We made it. We made it through the magical nerdery. So if you're interested in learning more about the Georgia.gov project, Darren Peterson did a case study at Drupal GovCon last year. There's a video available. But he's also going to be presenting it at DrupalCon Minneapolis in May. And we also had Mark Drummond did a presentation about the front end stuff that they did at Drupal GovCon. So those are pretty good presentations to check out. If you want to know more about migrations from Lullabot, we have a podcast where we just chatted about some of these things and some other migration stories. Wampy has written a couple of articles. We have another podcast where we interviewed Mauricio about his 31 days of Drupal migrations. And I posted one about using authentication during API migrations. So I'm hoping to write some more articles in my spare time once I figure out what spare time is. And so stay tuned for more. Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about the go live? Was there any downtime on the sites and kind of any surprises when you went through this?
Right. So the question is, were there any issues or surprises when we shifted from the Drupal 7 and posted the sites live? Not that I'm aware of. Marcus Cano really handled that process, and they had a lot of things scripted, and probably James had some hand in there too. It was kind of seamless. I'm going to speak for Marcos because he's the one that had to do the push the button and monitor it. But it worked pretty well, and they just did it 6 sites at a time. We would sometimes even get on a launch call, and so we would be like, yay, 6 more sites. Working with the team, they have a developer, and she was more focused on the maintenance of the Drupal 7 sites and helped with the transitions, and so it was really a team effort in that sense. Yeah. So not that I know of. Yeah.
This was great, first of all. So I'm interested in some about the file migrations. You said you prioritize rollbacks.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to guess when you had to roll back file migrations, the default behavior is that the destination files are deleted when that happens. I've found with large migrations that have gigabytes of files that are getting migrated, when you have to roll back one of those, it's kind of, it's kind of like an UG, because maybe it's not the file part of the migration, that the file copy that the problem isn't the problem, but something else is. So did you guys do anything funky there so you could kind of mitigate that when rolling back file migrations?
Yeah, so the question is, prioritizing rolling back migrations of files, because it's a little bit of a pain to delete files during that rollback, right? So Marcos did most of the file migrations. I'm not as clear, on how those worked exactly. I'm almost wondering and thinking that we may have had a process that we said, okay, the files already live here, like we physically moved the files and did something. I'm not really sure, but I could probably get you some details on that.
Yeah, no,
on that process.
I'd be interested to know, because that's always something that I struggle with.
Yeah.
When the client has 50 gigs of files, and,
Yeah.
you got to roll them back and rerun that migration, and it takes a while.
Yeah.
And then can you go back a few slides? Because I had another question about files. Keep going one more again, right there. So the second bullet, where you were changing image tags to embedded media entities, were you using any entity generate for something like that?
To generate the media entity?
Yeah, because if you're doing some image tag, that may or may not be in a managed file. So I'm just curious,
Right.
because I've had to deal with stuff like that before. And again, I try and stay away from entity generate for the exact same reason you said,
Right.
the rollback issue. So was there anything cool that you did there so that you could avoid creating media entities that got rolled back?
Yeah, so the question is, how do we handle the image tag transformation into embedded media entities? Were we creating those entities during this migration? How was that handled? We had the files migrated first in the order of the group. And then, so we made an assumption that all images in the site were managed files. So,
Right,
yay,
so you-
lucky us, right?
Yeah, okay.
We didn't have to navigate that. There may have been some edge cases that needed to be massaged in that way. But I think they, because, they handled the process in Drupal 7, the client, they were the ones that said, we'll go with that.
Cool.
Any other questions? Yes?
What was the reason for not migrating the content types and taxonomies?
Good question. So why didn't we migrate the content types? There was an entire process with our content strategy team to see what kind of improvements could be made to the platform before, so like based on how they've used Drupal 7, are there things they would like to change? Are there better ways that they can manage their content and have a different architecture? And so because it was going to be very different, we were actually we were taking some content and splitting it into separate things that could be referenced. So instead of having like an address field, we created a contact with the address once and then made sure that all of the things that had that address were pointing to that contact now, like as a reference. So fixing some of that content duplication issues that they had in Drupal 7 into Drupal 8.
Basically, the structure of the content type itself was changed.
Right. Yes, there were a lot of changes to the actual content model in Drupal 8 for sure.
I don't think I've ever migrated a site where we migrated the content types. It's always a good opportunity to make it better.
Yep.
So what did you do about redirects?
Redirects. So that was actually one of the things we added later in the Squealer reports. So the question is, how did we handle redirects? We use the Squealer reports to kind of monitor that, and I'm pretty sure that we did. I think Marcos did that migration. We did migrate the redirects, pretty sure, and URL aliases. And we had a lot of logging, and I think that was maybe a case where the logging was telling us that this happened, and we wanted that to happen kind of situation. But yeah, we did the migration of that. Yes?
When you mentioned about the number of sites, were they all production sites, or they like variants of QA, all that, like 85 plus sites?
Right,
And
so
what are the size of it? Like, for example, the database size or even the OS file size?
right, so
The site size, I meant.
okay,
Like
so
when you take a backup or a tar or a site, how big was it?
I don't know actual values. So the 85 sites, they are agencies throughout Georgia. So this is the state of Georgia government. All these agency sites were using the platform. And so they were each kind of doing their own thing with a similar code base. Each of them had their own database, which was nice. That way we could say, okay, we're only going to focus on these 6. And I think we even grouped them in 6s based on the size of things so that we would have a similar size of resources. So like those Drupal 7 files and databases that needed to be accessible for the migration, so that we could handle that load. Did I answer your question, sort of?
Well,
They were all production. They were all production sites, but we would take dumps of the Drupal 7 database. That was a lot of the DevOps magic that I talk about. James needs to do a presentation on that. So there were processes to pull the database, sanitize it. There were all these scripts written for this. Put it in the key.io, make it available for Tugboat and our locals, so that we were kind of always getting updated databases. And I think it updated maybe every week. So like every Sunday it would all run, and then on Monday we would have the latest stuff to work with. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yes.
Just a suggestion, if you ever have to go through some of this again, like the cleaning up of content in and from the WYSIWYG, replacing media links within the WYSIWYG, creating redirects. There's a module called Migration Tools, which you can do most of that right from the YAML file instead of having to like do custom code.
Okay.
So there's things you want to strip out of the WYSIWYG, like heading 1s, or you want to convert heading 1s to heading 2s because they don't play nicely with Drupal.
Right.
Like all of that can be done right from within your YAML file.
So a suggestion was made to use Migration Tools. Has a lot of process plugins. Is that what you're saying?
Not migrate tools, migration tools.
Migration Tools
It has
has
a whole
process
set of its
plugins
own.
for transforming WYSIWYG content. It's useful. Yes.
Is there something that while you were working on this migration or something, I wish I would have like something? Did you have like a wish list? It would be so much easier to do it if.
The question is there something I wish we had done differently in retrospect, right?
No, not exactly. I'm saying if.
Or had available. A tool that I would have available?
Tool, yeah.
Okay.
If I would have a power drill, I could do it much quicker.
Yes.
If I had a hammer.
Well, that's actually something that happened with the DOM process plugin was merged. And so we had that available after we were doing our regular expression replacements. That came available, and we tried to utilize that and work it into the system. And I know that with the current site that I'm working on with migration, the developer doing the migration actually said we need to upgrade Drupal so that we can have access to all the new tools. There are already new tools available in the migrate contrib modules and core, I would assume. So things are improving. Even since we just did this. This just finished this year. So there's already new tools out there. So yeah, I can't think of anything specific.
How long did the whole thing take?
So the migration, I'm trying to think when it wrapped up earlier this year. I think at the end of January, that was the last sites that were migrated, and I believe I rolled off the project last July. So we had started it probably in about the spring, and then so it took almost a year to fully migrate all of those sites on that migration phased approach.
So if you were just doing one site, it would probably take what?
It all depends on your complexity. So there, out of the box, the Drupal module migration or migrate modules can actually export all the configuration you need to migrate your site from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. You might need to investigate some things like, does this contrib module exist in Drupal 8 and that sort of thing. But it really, that's really how I got started. I exported the migration and then I started customizing it the way we needed to be customized. So it's kind of an interesting way to learn migration as well, to just run that. I can't remember what the function is, but it generates all the configuration that you can then tweak. And it will migrate your content structures, your content types, and all of that sort of thing. But we just didn't do that in this particular migration. Yes.
How big was your team, including the DevOps?
Yeah. So the team that I introduced, that was everyone that worked on participated with migration. We had other developers that were. Let me go way back. There you go. So this was our core migration team, and then we had other people who were creating content types and doing other things on the project as well.
And that was part of your team, or that was part of the...
It was Lullabot team. So Lullabot works on, I believe, the discovery and the content strategy part of it, and into development. And then I actually rolled off the project in July of last year, and we had onboarded MediaCurrent to then take over the migration. So we set it all up, we figured out this process, and then they became that developer that would fix any edge cases situation, and they continued to work with some members of our team to complete the migration of all of the sites. Yes?
I have a question. What would be some suggestions that you would make for people that have smaller teams that are trying to handle a migration? I know at my previous position there were we only had 2 developers and maybe 2 other people, so 4 of us total.
So suggestion for a small, what would you do if we had a smaller team? Hopefully the site is not as large as Georgia.gov, right? In this situation. Like I said, this is a very complex case study. And you can export a lot of the migrations, the configuration out of the box and then tweak it from there. I guess it really depends on how much the content model is going to change. And so, maybe you think about that in your scope of the project. If you have a lean team, maybe you don't want to suggest as many changes in Drupal 8. Or let's migrate everything to Drupal 8 and see how we might be able to make adjustments once it's there, that sort of thing. Migration itself is not as complex as I have made it out to be in this presentation. This is a very complex situation. Yeah.
You talk about paragraphs, and you also talk about field collections. How did you handle the field collections and swapping those out to?
Yeah, so how did I handle field collections? I'm trying to remember where they used field collections. It was very paragraphs heavy. So I do remember handling the paragraph side, and there may be a situation with the field collections, but I did some crazy stuff. That's all I gotta say. No. It was about getting, so whenever you're looking at the content in a row of migration, you only see the reference to the paragraph. So we had some functions that would then go to the database and give us the information we needed about those paragraphs during the migration. So I need to kind of clean that up and make it a little more shareable, because it was very powerful to make sure you had all that information and you didn't have to figure out what to do with the reference, right? Did I answer your question a little bit? Yeah. Yep.
Why was the decision made to just use a WYSIWYG body field versus all the different ways we like to structure data in AAA?
Right, so why did we use the WYSIWYG body field with entity embeds? This was something that came from the content strategy team. We just took that and went with that, but those decisions were made earlier on in the process. Yeah. All right. See me later if you have more questions, but thank you.